Well, obviously, I'm disappointed in today's decision, not entirely surprised, but disappointed. I do want to dial back the predictions of devastation, because it's very important that we recognize what did not happen today as well as what did happen today. What did not happen today is that the Supreme Court left untouched its decision from 2003 in the Grutter case, meaning that affirmative action is still alive and well. What the Supreme Court did do today was it did say that it is constitutional for a state, as in the case of Michigan, to essentially alter the political process, to require those who are seeking to ensure that there is opportunity and access and inclusion of racial minorities, of ethnic minorities, of national origin minorities at the University of Michigan, to essentially, if they want to influence that process and have race or any of those factors be considered, they would have to actually amend the Constitution to overcome this referendum. But if you are a representative of the university's alumni association, if you are a representative of athletes, and you want those considerations to weigh more heavily in the admissions process, you can simply lobby, use your influence, engage in the political process like any other group. Only if you want race, national origin, or ethnicity to be considered, do you have to face this constitutional hurdle. And so essentially what the court did today was that it licensed Michigan and essentially said our federal constitution, there's nothing in our federal constitution that stops voters in a state from being able to create this higher hurdle for those who are trying to press for opportunity and access when it's based on race, national origin, or ethnicity.
The decision is neither a surprise nor does it really change the legal status quo. As she said, it does not revisit the decisions that say that affirmative action is permitted. However, it does hold that affirmative action is not constitutionally required. And for better or for worse, Justice Sotomayor wrote a passionate dissent, one of the most important of her career, and she powerfully lays out the long history of attempts to circumvent formal guarantees of racial equality. And she says we can't close our eyes to what's really going on here in terms of the effects on minority enrollment. However, the cases on which she's relying, which were decided mostly in the 60s and 70s, have basically been so narrowed by the Supreme Court that court watchers are not surprised, really, that they weren't relied on here. The big surprise, it should be a small comfort, in fact, is that only Justices Scalia and Thomas wanted to formally overrule those decisions that say that when a decision clearly is intended to and has the effect of injuring minorities, then you can't decide it at the state level. Justice Kennedy and Justice Roberts and Justice Alito wanted to preserve those decisions. They just said it's not clear that bans on affirmative actions harm minorities. Reasonable people can disagree about that, and we think that should be decided at the Democratic level. It was very interesting that Justice Stephen Breyer, a liberal justice, joined the conservatives in this respect. He cares a lot about democracy, and he says, look, basically liberals are going to be better putting their faith in the ballot box than not, and I think because the people decided to ban it here, the court should defer. So it doesn't really change the legal status quo that much.
We've held that the 14th Amendment protects all races. I mean, that was the argument in the early years, that it protected only the blacks. But I thought we rejected that.
In the year before the ban, the school's freshman class was 7% African American. The year after the ban, it fell to 5%. The same pattern in California at Berkeley. Before affirmative action ban, the freshman class was at 14%, Sherilyn, African American. The year after the ban, it fell all the way to 9%, because you can have a state-by-state banning of race and never have to have the Supreme Court do it now.
Yeah, Reverend Sharpton, I think your point is very well taken, and that's why voters have to be awake and alert to the kind of rhetoric that's going to be used, as was used in Michigan, the disinformation, the fear-mongering, the idea of, others coming in to take what is ours, the idea of demonizing minorities as being ill-equipped to take their place at the university level. And I think, Reverend Sharpton, we actually have to extrapolate the figures that you gave, into what this means for the future in these states. State universities educate the leaders of their state. The University of Maryland educates most of the leaders in Maryland. If you look at the General Assembly in Maryland, if you look at upwards of 90% of the judges on Alabama's appellate courts went through the University of Alabama system. 78% of the legislators in Florida went through the University of Florida system. Those state institutions are educating the leaders of tomorrow. And it's the reason why so many state institutions actually want to use affirmative action, because they want to create a diverse learning environment for the for the leaders that they're developing for tomorrow. So it's not just the figures that we see today, which are bad enough, as you say, and University of Michigan African-American students a month and a half ago had a sleep-in overnight to protest what they say is the racially hostile environment on that campus. But it's also the future leadership within the states in this country that is at peril.
The conservatives on the Roberts Court embrace a vision of colorblindness that is not sympathetic to any kind of racial classifications, even those that are intended to help minorities. And that sort of decision inspired passionate dissents from liberal justices like Justice Breyer and Justice Ginsburg, saying that they were ignoring history, and that really, finally, when minorities get a break, when they have universities or state legislatures who enact policies in their favor, then the conservative court strikes them down. That's what made this case so interesting, that even someone like Justice Breyer, who wrote a 77-page dissent from the court's decision striking down affirmative action a few years ago, said, this case is different. I really feel, Breyer said, that as long as these decisions are made democratically, school boards should be allowed to adopt affirmative action, as many of them are doing across the country. But if the people of the state want to ban it, then the Constitution doesn't speak to that. That's why Sherilyn is so correct that it's important both to stress the effect of these policies in decreasing enrollment. It's important to stress that every time the court has tried to ban affirmative action, state legislatures and universities have responded by trying to preserve it. So there's a strong constituency for affirmative action in universities. What's necessary now is for supporters of affirmative action to convince the people of the state, the people of each state, that these policies are necessary. You know, the polls are quite close on this, so I think there is a fighting chance. There's no reason necessarily to believe that.
It's going to have to be a fight, though, Sherilyn, and these referendums can pop up everywhere. It's going to take a lot of mobilization. Let's not forget, in 2006, this was called the Civil Rights Initiative in Michigan, and a lot of people voted for it thinking they were voting for affirmative action, and in fact it wasn't, because it was titled the Civil Rights Initiative.
That's exactly right. That's what I mean when I say voters will have to be alert and awake to recognize that this will be wrapped in the cotton wool of colorblindness and will be described as a civil rights initiative, but this is what it means. And this is why Justice Sotomayor's dissent is so important. I challenge your viewers to read her dissent, because what she has done is she has articulated a reality that is too rarely spoken in the public domain, and certainly by leaders. And her insistence that we deal with the reality of race, recognizing all the progress that we've made extraordinary progress, but she articulates a very powerful, personal, not personal to her, but to the recognition of the way race plays out in the lives of real people in this country. And I think her decision, and actually her statement that you read, Reverend Sharpton, that the only way to deal with discrimination is to talk about it openly and candidly, is a direct response to Chief Justice Roberts' articulation in 2007 that the only way to stop racial discrimination is to stop discriminating based on race. She rejects that and offers a powerful narrative that counters what she would regard as a kind of fantasy land of race that the majority engages in.